So we're in John chapter 13 and we're starting at verse 1. John chapter 13, starting at verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, he took off his outer clothing, and he wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. I'm not referring to all of you. I know those who I have chosen. But this is to fulfill the passage of Scripture. He who shared my bread has turned against me. I'm telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am who I am. Very truly I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me." After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, "Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, "What you are about to do, do quickly." But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. And since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival, or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Simon Peter asked him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I am going you cannot follow now, but you will follow later." Peter asked, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Then Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Crumbs. What a passage. Praise God for his word to us. And God, as we open up your word this morning, will you speak to us? Encourage us, Lord. Challenge us. Draw us closer to you. Amen. Okay, I've got a question for you. If you knew that today was your last day on earth, how would you spend it? Have a think. If you knew that today was your last day on earth, how would you spend it? Have a think. Turn to your neighbour. It can be as sensible or as silly or as wacky or as poignant as you like. If you knew that today was your last day on earth, how would you spend it? Off you go, and then send your ideas back. Nobody desperate to ride the highest roller coaster in the world, or so you'd all just have a cup of tea and watch a bit of football. Oh, you'd go to the beach, Dave. I'd come with you. What, sorry, what? With Amelia Clark? I have no idea who this girl is. You've probably got more chance, to be fair. Did you hear what he said? Dave said, sorry, for the benefit of the royal box, Dave said he'd love to go to the beach with Amelia Clark from Game of Thrones, but knowing his luck, he'd be more likely to get Ken Clark. No one said that they would spend their last day on earth washing other people's feet. I mean, would you? I mean, that's the last thing you'd do. You'd do all of the things that centred around you, wouldn't you? If it was my last day on earth and I knew it, I would want the world to focus on me, to do the things that I want to do. Like every day. Thank you, Adrian. Carry on. Come on. You can do it yourself. I'm going to edit it. I've got to edit this later now. Would you spend it washing the feet of someone who was going to betray you? And washing the feet of someone who was going to deny ever knowing you? Because that's what Jesus did. Jesus knew that this was his last day on earth. He knew that this was vital, this was urgent. Tonight he's going to be arrested and tried. Tomorrow he will be crucified. And he spends today washing the feet of the disciples and of Peter and of Judas. We join Jesus and the disciples as they're gathered together in the upper room. It's almost Passover. Jesus' time is almost up, and John gives us in those opening few words the theme, the underlying principle, the reason for everything that will follow next. Having loved his own who were in the world, Jesus loved them to the end. It is love that we're going to see played out in this room tonight. It's love that will be displayed in the washing of the disciples' feet. It's love that is displayed around the table as they eat together. It is love that warns Peter to be strong. It is love that will ultimately be poured out on the cross. So Jesus and his disciples are gathered together in an upper room, and they're in the dining room ready to eat together. The meal is being prepared. And although John in his gospel doesn't go into the details of the Last Supper like the other gospel writers do, we know by the events that he talks about and the teaching that he mentions, it slots in to the other gospel writers' accounts, and so we know that that is the setting. So the meal is in process or in preparation. And Jesus does something quite extraordinary. He takes on a demeaning role, the role of the lowest servant, by washing the disciples' feet. And we can tell that the disciples are on edge. They don't like this. They're uncomfortable. We hear it in Peter's words. He's the only one that's got the bottle to say anything, but you can guarantee the others were feeling it as well. And Peter's response to Jesus' actions. You know how we've been sort of noticing each week the unusual, extraordinary event in the usual setting? This really does fall into that category. It would be usual that on entry to someone's home, as a welcome, as a sign of hospitality, as a sign of blessing, that someone would wash your feet. In that place, in that culture, the roads are dirty and dusty and sandals are worn on your feet. So it makes sense. But washing someone's feet was a job that was seen as so demeaning. It was such a lowly job that it was written that no Jewish slave could be made to do it. Only Gentile slaves, the lowest of the low. So we really do have to understand the cultural significance of this act. It's not the foot washing itself that's a problem, it's who is doing it. It's like, I was writing this trying to think of a really gross job. It's like cleaning out the cat litter, or cleaning the bin, you know, when the bag's split and all the bin juice has gone onto the bottom. It's an ordinary job. It's gross, but it needs doing. Now imagine one day that the Queen comes round, gets on her hands and knees and starts clearing out the cat litter. Or the person that you respect and admire and look up to the most in the world. I mean, I don't know who might that be. For me, I suppose, who would I put on that kind of pedestal? My old college principal or someone like that. And then it's his job. He does it. But that person that you admire and respect and look up to. And what if they came round and started cleaning your bin? See, it's not the act that's the problem. It's who's doing it. It was considered demeaning, degrading, done only by the lowest servant. And in this setting, Jesus, their teacher, their rabbi, their Lord, he is the one who takes off his outer clothes, ties a towel around his waist, and washes their feet. I mean, this would be staggering at any time. But it's even more incredible when we realise, when we really take seriously, this is his final evening with his disciples. And also when we realise who was in the room with him. I must admit, I hate feet. They do a job, don't they? I mean, if we didn't have them, we'd fall over a lot. But I hate feet. And there's become a bit of a tradition in many churches, particularly in Western evangelical churches, where on Maundy Thursday, the vicar or the minister or the priest or whoever basically gets you all to take off your socks and shoes and washes the feet of those in the congregation. I've already had people check with me this morning that I'm not going to make you do that. And you know, as I reflect on this, I wonder if we've got it a bit wrong. Jesus washes the disciples' feet and then he says, "Do you understand what I've done? Now you go and do the same to each other." So did he really mean by that once a year you should be made to remove full socks and shoes and tights or whatever, while your minister or vicar or whoever pours water on your feet? Or actually, is it easier for us to read it that way? Because to actually take this passage and this command seriously is far too hard for us. Because it goes against everything that is our human nature. Quite frankly, we don't want to. Jesus takes on the role of a servant, of the lowest servant, and he lovingly tends to his disciples, even Peter, which we can kind of deal with. Because Peter repents and is welcomed back into the fold and goes on to do incredible things for Jesus. But even Judas, Jesus humbly and tenderly washes the feet of the man who he knows will leave that place and betray him and will see him killed. And he calls us to do the same. We are commanded in this passage to show that same depth of love, of tenderness, of humble service to each other. Because this is about each other. This specific passage isn't about the world. Jesus says, those who have been washed in him, in other words, those who are believers, those who are followers of Jesus, those who have been washed clean, we need only to have our feet washed. This is a call to a depth of real love, of real humble service to each other. To lower ourselves for the benefit of each other, to be as a servant to each other, not looking for recognition or gain or status or praise, but humbling ourselves by putting each other first, even those who would be Judas to us. That's the hard bit, isn't it? Because we all know we've got those people in our lives who we would walk over hell and high water for if they needed us. We've got those people in church who we consider soul friends, Christians who journey with us, people who are more precious to us than our own life. And we say, of course, Jesus, of course, I will love them and serve them. Of course, I will become as a lowly servant to them, because we know that they will get it. They will understand, they will appreciate it. And also because if the opportunity arose or we needed them, we know that they would reciprocate. I can humble myself for them because they would humble themselves for me. But then there are the others, aren't there? The criticisers, the ones whose arrows always seem to penetrate our armour, the ones who grumble at us or about us, the ones who hurt us, or even just the ones we simply don't get on with as well. They're good people, but they're not my people. If I humble myself and become as a servant to them, well, they might expect me to do it again, or they might think that they really are better than me, or they will see it as weakness, etc., 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 and we make our excuses. And we justify to ourselves why we don't do it. Jesus removed his outer garment, he wrapped a towel round his waist, and he tenderly and lovingly washed the feet of the man who would stamp on his head that very evening. That is the example that we are called to follow. That is the identity that we are called to carry as Christians in a world that is constantly at war somewhere or another, where human relationships are scarred by gossip and scandal and rumour and tension and argument. We are called to be people whose sacrificial love for one another shines out like a beacon. This, Jesus says, this characteristic of deep, sacrificial, self-giving love, this is to be our defining feature. It is how the world will recognise that we are followers of Jesus. Not how we love the world. Yes, that is important. Yes, that is vitally important. And that's our great commission, to take the love of God out into the world. But our primary characteristic as followers of Jesus, our identifying, whatever it is, our identifying thing should be how we love each other. How do we love the person who hurts us? How do we love the person who seeks our downfall? How do we love the person who doesn't love us back? If they were in Jesus' band of close friends, you can guarantee they're in ours. This love, this humble service is what will set us apart. This is what a broken and hurting world will see and be drawn to. This sacrificial, self-giving, self-humbling love that we are called to show to one another, even to those who would be Judas to us. See, we can't even give the argument that perhaps Jesus didn't know what Judas was going to do, can we? Because as they recline at the table, Jesus tells them, he says that he will be betrayed, and the person who he shares his bread with is the one. Just look at that in the passage. Remember, he's only told John this, not all of the disciples. We are in on the secret. I sometimes think we get the idea when we read it that Jesus announced to the whole of the room that the person who he dips the bread with will betray him. But look at the passage. John leaned back against Jesus and in a private conversation asked him, and Jesus answered him. And you know, I said before, we have to be careful that we don't paint Judas as some kind of pantomime villain who dresses in black and comes in swooshing his cape and we boo every time he enters the story. Because he was one of them. He was a disciple. He was their friend. And if we look sensibly at the passage, we see that Judas actually took one of the places of honour at the dinner table. Did you know that? If you've heard me preach on this passage before, you know that. It's fascinating, so let's take a little detour. In the lead up to this meal, in the lead up to this evening, the disciples have been having a conversation along the road as they journey about who is the greatest and who is the least. And they talk, if you remember, about who is going to sit in the places of honour at the right and the left-hand side of Jesus. You remember that conversation? Well, the disciples were in the dining room of the house, and it doesn't look anything like our dining room, and it doesn't look like the famous painting that Leonardo da Vinci did either. The dining room was called a triclinium, and it's three-sided. It's like three sides. It's like a U-shaped table, three-sided. The clues are all there, triclinium. And the people eating, it's three sides, and I've got to stay in my camera. It's three sides and it slopes. And there would be cushions and all sorts of things laid on the slopes. So it wouldn't be steps, it would be like slopes. And people would recline on the slope, and then there's the table all around, you recline, and the food is served into the middle, you recline on your left side, and your right side is there to take the food and to eat the food. That's what the dining room looked like. So we know that John was on Jesus' right-hand side, so in front of him slightly to his right. We know this because he was able to lean back and talk to Jesus in that place. We know that Peter most probably was in front of John because Peter asked John, John asked Jesus. You see how it works? And then Jesus takes a piece of bread and he dips it into the dish and he gives it to Judas. And in order to do that, Judas would have had to be next to him on his left-hand side. And then we realise that Judas was in the position of greatest trust behind Jesus. Judas literally had Jesus' back. And it would be a perfectly normal, natural, regular thing that you would dip the bread and give it to the person next to you. As normal as passing the peas or passing a glass of wine. It was a normal thing. It was not an unusual thing for Jesus to give the person next to him some bread. And so when Judas leaves the room, only 3 people know why. Jesus, John, and Judas himself. The other disciples thought he was going out to give some money to the poor or to make preparations for the festival or something. They had no idea what Judas was going to do. They had no idea what was about to happen. There was a line in our passage, though. It's so incredibly significant. I wonder, did you notice it? Because in our English translations, we can miss it completely. Just have a look at verse 19. Jesus is telling the disciples, they're gathered, he's telling them that the person who he dips his bread with is going to betray him. He's telling them that he's going to be betrayed, and he says in verse 19, I am telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am who I am. Actually, a more accurate translation of that verse would be, I'm telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am. That doesn't make sense in English grammar, does it? So the translators have added the extra bit, so that you will believe that I am who I am. Remember back at the burning bush, when Moses asked God his name and God said, I am who I am. In English, I am who I am. In Greek, ego eimi. In Hebrew, Yahweh. Jesus is telling us all these things so that we, along with the disciples, will look back and remember and know that Jesus is the great I am. So Jesus knows who's in the room that evening. He knows who he has chosen. He knows what Judas will do. He knows Peter's impetuousness. He knows that Judas will be away now to sell him to the religious leaders. He knows that Peter's bravery will desert him, and when his life is on the line, he will deny ever knowing Jesus. He knows that all of the other disciples, except John, will be so terrified that they will run away and hide. He knows that he will face his end alone, and still he loves them. He loves them to the end, and still he teaches them. And still he washes their feet and encourages them to do the same to each other. And he encourages us to do the same. Because it is by our love, by the way that we love and serve and humble ourselves and put each other first, that will shine so brightly in our dark world. Acts of love when it will be easier to hate. Acts of reconciliation when it would be easier to walk away and break fellowship. Acts of service when it feels like all we have done is serve and no one has done the same for us. Those are the things that will shine like beacons in our broken world. That, church, is who Jesus calls us to be. Shall we pray?